Alright, so we got beef stroganoff for Lorraine Ann. So this is how we're gonna make it tonight. There's a little zing on my beef stroganoff. I got some gherkins and some pickled onions. I'm gonna put the knife on the steel. Now I got some stew meat here, and I'm just gonna cut it up a little smaller. Traditionally, stroganoff is cut into thinner slices, often you can use sirloin even. But this is stew meat. Now I'm cutting it against the grain, so it's a little not as tough when it's being cooked, right? So you look where the grain is, and I cut the opposite way. And I'm just gonna slice all the meat up, so it's about the same size. I'm going to chop up some mushrooms here, give them a quick slice. I have about 1.5 pounds of stew meat. I am using about 7 mushrooms here. I have some gherkins. The gherkins I'm going to slice up to give it a nice little zing with the pickled onions. I got the baby pickled onions. So I have about a few gherkins. I'm going to slice them all up, put them in the bowl, put them aside. The pickled onions now, I mean, you can't leave them whole. I'm going to slice them into half. Now, what's a bit different, you don't normally put celery and carrots into your beef stroganoff, but I'm going to put a bit of celery. I'm going to chop it up quite nice and fine. Same with the carrots, and that way it just gives it a little more vegetables into the stew and gives it a little more flavor as well. I have a whole onion. I'm going to just cut the knuckle off the bottom, slice it all up. So we're going to slice up, so it's 1 onion. I used about half a carrot. I used 1 stem of celery. I have 2 green onions, which I'm going to chop up here for the garnish. I have some rosemary growing in the garden. Usually I would use thyme, but you know, the love of cooking, we can make it any way we want. So I have 2 sprigs of rosemary I'm going to chop up, probably about 2 tablespoons worth. In my 10-inch skillet, the water beads, I put the meat right in. No oil, right? Greaseless cooking, that's the way to do it. Then I put my chopped carrots right on top. I got my celery I'm throwing in there. I'm putting the onions in there as well. And we're going to get that all in a nice saute. So I have it on a medium-high heat. Water was beating, put everything in, get my rosemary in there. Now, with beef stroganoff, one thing I always put in there is mustard. I'm using dry mustard. You can use Dijon mustard. I'm going to put mustard powder, plus I'm going to use half a teaspoon of chopped garlic. So there's the mustard and the garlic in there. Now I'm going to just let that cook for probably about 5 minutes. I'm seeing some of the liquid sweating out of the meat. I'm putting in half a cup of flour. That's going to bind it. Now traditionally in a roux you'd use half flour and half fat, but I don't want to use any oils today. So what I did was I sweat the meat until the juice comes out, add the flour in and mix it all up. Now when you give it a good mix, make sure the heat's still on, and you'll see it get really nice and pasty. We're starting to cook the flour into the meat. So I'm going to let that cook for about 2 minutes and keep stirring it, right? Then I'm going to add in some brandy. Right? Use brandy or cognac. You can skip the alcohol altogether, but I love cooking with booze. It adds a nice, lovely flavor. So I put in there about a 1/4 cup of brandy. I'm going to put in also about 1.5 cups of red wine. So I put the brandy in, I mixed it in. When you're adding your liquid to your stew and you've added the flour being the roux, you want to not add the liquid too quickly so it splits. So the first amount of liquid I add in a little bit, then I add a little bit more, keep mixing. Now I'm putting in beef broth. I've put enough beef broth in just to cover the meat, throwing in 2 bay leaf, and have this on a medium-high heat to get things going. I'm throwing the mushrooms in there. When it starts coming to a bit of a boil, that's when I'm going to turn it down to a medium-low heat, and I'm going to add the gherkins and the onions at this point. Now you can see it's starting to thicken up a little bit, which is nice, so it's what we want. We're going to let this cook for about under an hour. It's about 45 minutes when I cook this dish. But once it becomes to that boil is when I add the gherkins and the onions. Give it a little mix. Then I'm going to put the lid on here and turn it down to a medium heat, a little bit lower than medium, but a medium-low heat, and let it cook for about 40 minutes. So it's 40 minutes later. It's thickened up really nicely. Just checking in to see if the meat's nice and tender. It's not tender enough for me to eat. I like my meat nice and tender, as everybody does, I'm sure. So we can let it cook a little bit longer. So just check the meat here and see how it's going. No, it's still tough. So we're going to let that go about another 10 minutes or so, and then we'll check it out. Now, I'm not putting the lid all the way down. I'm leaving it ajar a bit so it'll reduce nicely, okay? So this is 10 minutes later. It's thickened up a bit more. Meat's getting there. Give it a good stir, see how it looks, and check for tenderness. It's getting there, but still a little bit tougher, but it's starting to thicken up. So because it's getting thicker like this, I'm going to add a little bit more beef broth, right? So I'm going to add my kosher salt. When using kosher salt, use a little more than you think, because it's not as salty as iodine salt. Iodized salt, I mean, sorry. So now we're going to get the beef broth in there. just to make it a little bit runnier because it's getting a little too thick. I'm going to cook it for another 10 minutes and it should be good to go. Alright, so mix it all up nicely. I turned up the heat to bring it to a boil once I put my liquid in. So I put the beef broth in, I cranked up the heat, brought it to a boil, and let it simmer for another, it was about 7 minutes. Now we're going to check the meat here, and yeah, it's nice and tender. It's good to go, right? So now at the very end, I'm adding my sour cream. So I'm putting in about 4 heaping tablespoons of sour cream, and we're just going to mix that up, right? So nicely yummy. That's the way Chef Warren likes to do it, and it's a yummy way to make beef stroganoff. I'm serving it with my wide noodles. Traditionally it's served with egg noodles, and that's the way Chef Warren likes to do it at dinner for 2. And that's the way you should be doing it too, and happy cooking.